Welcome to Sketchbook Legends. I'm your artist, Paul Hostetler. Today we're drawing Benoit Blanc, the gentleman sleuth with a buttery southern drawl from Rian Johnson's Knives Out series of mystery movies. Although really it should be called the Benoit Blanc series, since Blanc is the only recurring character. But marketers and executives are infamously all morons who should more often be flung at full force from their office windows into the street than obeyed. So the series is called the Knives Out movies, after the title of the first flick. To understand Benoit Blanc, one has to understand the murder mystery genre. Arguably invented by Edgar Allan Poe, the classic murder mystery involves a crime, usually a murder, that normal detectives and cops cannot solve, but that the main character detective can and does. And then at the end of the story, he explains not only the details of the crime to the cops and to the reader, but also how he deduced the solution. And usually that solution is found through noticing a number of clues strewn throughout the plot. Sometimes there are enough clues for the reader to solve the mystery themselves. Sometimes the detective reveals key information during his or her monologue. Other sleuths in this genre include Poe's Auguste Dupin, Catherine Green's Amelia Butterworth, G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown, Donald J. Sobel's Encyclopedia Brown, and of course Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot and Jane Marple. Now, right here I've decided to depict Benoit Blanc in one of his classic poses where he's gesturing forcefully at some clue or another. Usually he does a lot of hand waving and running around in the course of any of the movies. As you can see, he's always very well dressed. I've got him in a sort of three-piece suit. And you can also see that he's holding a little cigar there too. Columbo had a cigar, Benoit Blanc has a cigar. There might be something with televised, filmed detectives and holding cigars, or maybe it's just an affect that they used so that the actor has something to do with his hands. Murder mysteries are a very rigidly defined genre. And in order to make it interesting, usually the detectives have some sort of personality quirk to distinguish them from the ordinary hoi polloi. Father Brown, for example, is a vicar who disguises his genius in his gentle, humble manner. Hercule Poirot is famously a fussy little Belgian with the world's neatest little mustache. And in writing Blanc, Johnson tried to shake up the character by giving him a southern accent and a soft spot for common decency. Now, allegedly, the original script called for Blanc to have the gentlest southern drawl, but Craig, who had previously done a Tennessee accent for the heist film Logan Lucky, I guess he decided to go whole hog on what one character calls a foghorn leghorn drawl in the first Knives Out movie. And he just honks. It's almost a caricature of what a southern person sounds like. And it's very fun to imitate. You can see here I'm doing my best to approximate Daniel Craig's likeness. But more than that, Daniel Craig is playing a character in these movies, Benoit Blanc, and I'm trying to depict Benoit Blanc's likeness, which may not necessarily be exactly the same as Daniel Craig's. Daniel Craig has little mannerisms and, styles himself in a particular way, and Benoit Blanc's styling is a little bit different in the way he arches his eyebrows and the way he holds his head and moves his lips. So I'm drawing out those distinguishing features as I've recognized them. When you're making characters like this, it's worthwhile to notice little things like that about how they are originally portrayed. And often, like a really good character is going to have those sort of small details built in that the fan artist can take advantage of. Now, there are 3 Benoit Blanc movies. I refuse to call them the Knives Out movies. There are 3 Benoit Blanc movies so far. In all 3, once Benoit Blanc is on the case, he cozies up to one of the suspects, who then aids him in his investigations. And usually until the last minutes of the movie, it's never made quite certain whether this person is actually a guilty party, but we as the audience don't want them to be. We've been, directed to be sympathetic toward them due to their kind and giving nature. The other characteristic of Benoit Blanc that I've already noted is his keen fashion sense. In the second movie, Glass Onion, Blanc is revealed to be gay. His partner is portrayed by Hugh Grant. And he also lives in a very expensive apartment somewhere in Manhattan. He's shown to have like a porch on a high-rise. So, altogether it leads up to a flamboyant, fashionable, gay detective from the deep, deep South. If he weren't so humorous, it would be an almost sort of a gothic portrayal. He'd fit right into one of those vampire movies that take place in the Deep South, or one of the witch movies. So it was something with one of those Anne Rice novels or something. Benoit Blanc would fit in there pretty well, and I don't think he'd even kill any vampires. Benoit Blanc is not one of those mystery detectives that people underestimate, like Miss Marple or Columbo, or Father Brown for that matter. Blanc wears his quirks on his sleeve, like Poirot. He's just a weird guy that people notice. His reputation precedes him, lending an air of trust to his presence that he erodes over the course of the story by apparently ignoring obvious conclusions and chasing after ridiculous notions, and then at the end he pulls a solution to the crime out of left field, and everyone's appropriately gobsmacked. I have him here wearing fancy leather shoes. I don't know enough about shoes to know what kind it is to have the little metal buckles across them that don't really do anything. And I'm not even sure if he wears any of those in any of the movies, but it seemed like the sort of thing that Blanc might have in his closet. And if Craig lives long enough to make enough of these movies, I'm sure that in a future installment, he would be wearing a pair of those fancy Italian leather shoes. Now, in a dark world with schemers, murderers, and just plain jerks, this is the sort of place where murder mysteries generally occur. Blanc appears as a beacon, hence I suppose the name Blanc, which is French for white. For that reason, I am not adding a whole lot of shade to his costume here. I wanted to portray him as being like a beacon of brilliance in a very morally murky world. Even down to, the smoke coming out of his cigar, which glows. I decided to do a little experimental art. That's what sketchbooks are for. I was gonna color the whole background with this graphite stick, make it all murky and gray and fuzzy. Rian Johnson is also very aware, since he invented the character, of what Blanc means. And, he dresses appropriately to his name. Blanc generally wears beiges and pastels, or sometimes whites, light colors. And he's often, placed against very dark backgrounds. In two of the movies, they take place in fall in the eastern United States, indoors. So you have a lot of wood paneling and stone masonry. The third film, Wake Up Dead Man, takes place at least half within a church. So you have lots of nooks and crannies and dramatic lighting, highlighting the characters, and against a cast that's dressed mostly in Eastern Seaboard sort of dark colors and blacks. Benoit Blanc pops. Now, I was actually up in the Hudson Valley where Wake Up Dead Man takes place. Stopped by a little art supply store, and I picked up these little pigment palettes. There's one of white, one of graphite there in the middle, and there's one, I think, of just plain charcoal at the bottom. Thought I'd try these out, do a little wet on dry action, see if I could get some texture in there. Use these materials to draw out some highlights. I especially wanted to have Benoit Blanc's cigar spraying out this sort of swirling halo of white smoke. That didn't quite work against the dry charcoal pencil. So I decided I was gonna, rather than try and give that pencil like another layer, I decided I'd go wet on dry with these. Each of the Knives Out films features paintings of the cast over the end credits. For the original film and for the second film, Glass Onion, all the portraits were painted by Rian Johnson's cousin, Zach Johnson. It should be noted, there is a hell of a lot of nepotism in these movies. Rian Johnson's cousin Mark designed the title cards for Knives Out based on vintage Agatha Christie paperbacks, and one of his other cousins, Nathan Johnson, composed the score for each film. So you got Ryan directing, Mark doing the graphic design, Zach doing painting, and Nathan doing the score. Apparently, it's a very talented family of Johnsons. The first movie even had Don Johnson appearing as a character, as a suspect. I don't know if Don Johnson is related to Ryan Johnson. In the commentary, he makes a joke out of it, but I couldn't tell how serious that was. But for the latest movie, Wake Up Dead Man, the portraits are painted by Isabella Watling, a British painter who had each of the actors sit so she could paint them from life. I suppose on Johnson's part, it's good to switch things around and generally not to hew exclusively to nepotism when making creative choices. Johnson doesn't usually film post-credit scenes, so these portraits are a little bit of a treat, and each one is shown against black, sort of like they're matted in a museum, and I think that works well, especially since the characters are often subtly color-coded, in the same way that Benoit Blanc is. You can see here that I'm doing my best to sort of make a black stone brick backdrop for Blanc to pop out against. I'm not doing my best job here. I thought it would look a lot different than it ended up doing, but, you know, this was a medium experiment, and when you make experiments, sometimes you got to be ready for any sort of result. This sketchbook in particular isn't necessarily the best thing for wet media. It's a multimedia sketchbook, but mostly they mean dry media like charcoal and pencil and pen. Not necessarily paint. I could see it puckering up pretty nicely when I was doing the painting, so I tried to work fast. Not only because I like to keep these videos under 30 minutes, but just so it wouldn't soak in and bleed through and ruin the other pages in the book. Now, I do have my own water bucket for painting, but since I don't film these at my easel or even my drafting table, I decided to go for a little teacup for my gray water, just because that's what my wife uses when she does painting, and I figured what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Altogether, Benoit Blanc is one of my favorite film characters in recent memory, not only because of the ostentatious sort of way that Daniel Craig portrays him, giving him a little color on his tie, but also in his combination of intellect and heart and ferocious tenacity in the pursuit of true justice, not necessarily just legal justice. Out of 3 movies, only one of them ends with the guilty party being dragged off by police. But in the sense that he wants vindication for the innocent and just desserts for the guilty. And he even defines guilt in the first movie as acting with true malice and forethought, which I think proves that Ryan Johnston thought this thing out, and I appreciate that. And I can't disagree with him. Throw in a little detail work here, just to fill them out. A couple of buttons. Adding a little shadow to Blanc here, just because it's been pointed out that when you bring things to the surface, as Blanc does, bringing the truth to the surface and all of these mysteries, the truth is not always pleasant. In fact, in a murder mystery, it usually isn't. There is a little bit of darkness to him. He actively enjoys the process and is almost giddy when there's a murder worth his attention, since he considers many crimes below his abilities. So he casts a shadow, even though he's a beacon of light in the darkness. And there he is, Rian Johnson's Benoit Blanc. If you like this video, you can click the like button. It is one of the many ways you can express your satisfaction, another of which is clicking the subscribe button. You can also find me on social media, on Patreon, or Ko-Fi at phostetlerart, all one word, links below. If you see me on the street, you can also just hand me wads of cash. I will accept cash and also traveler's checks. If you want to rewatch the videos, you can do that too. Just put them on repeat over and over. Any and all attention is appreciated. Until next week, stay sketching, stay legendary. See you next time.